This is a book review of The Steel Claw, Invisible Man by Ken Bulmer and Jesus Blasco. And this is from Treasury of British Comics, Rebellion. They've been bringing out so many brilliant books, and there are loads and loads and loads of brilliant books to come, it looks like. I mean, there's the Spider one, Adam Eterno, and many, many others. So really look at, they're just brilliant books. This has got volume 1, so I assume that there's going to be a volume 2, volume 3, etc. Though it doesn't mention volume 1 on the front cover, which is a bit odd. Nor does it actually mention inside either, which is very odd as well. Now, it's all in black and white, of course. These were from the 60s. Obviously, British comics generally were in black and white. Occasionally, you have some colour there, but there's no colour for the story here. There is some colour at the back, but it's for the adverts for upcoming books. You've got the Spider. Got there, the Spider coming in April 2021. Now, this book, of course, came out in 2021. It's only just come out, 2021. And also you've got another one here for Adam Eterno from the Pages of Thunder. So you've got that story there. And also another one, you've got a new story. And also you've got the biographies at the back of the writers. So now, the stories themselves, in these 112 pages in black and white, you've got now, this is Valiant from 6th of October 1962. Obviously, I assume the first issue. And all the way through to 21st of September 1963 and the Valiant Annual 1965-66. Thing is with these, I don't know how many reprints, how many stories were actually created. Maybe it was hundreds. I really don't know. I know it went on to like Vulcan and those sorts of things, but I have no idea if there were thousands of stories or if it was a couple of hundred. But obviously, there's about 50, I assume, in here, 50 separate, obviously, strip. They're every week, so it's obviously for a year's worth, approximately about 50, I would say. I haven't counted them. There's an introduction. Always love an introduction. And also, it's, of course, got all the details of people there. So there's all the various issues there. Now, the book itself. Well, what happens? The Steel Claw. All starts, he's a scientist. He's helping this professor. And an experiment is sort of, there's a bit of, and it goes wrong. He thinks, well, I should, explodes. And then suddenly he finds he's invisible, as you do. And he goes off, maybe slightly deranged from the experiment. Obviously, this has created a bit of a thing being invisible, though always a problem. How would he see? Because, of course, the eyes and everything. Well, but that's a mere quibble. No one worried about that when they were 10 years old. Now, when I'm a bit more critical, I think that wouldn't work so well. However, he goes off, commits a few crimes, and of course, straight away, he's being chased by the police. But he's also finds out that he's got a bit of a problem. There is a problem that his invisibility does not last. He requires a bit extra, boost of things. So you can see there he suddenly reforms. Though, weirdly, his clothes reform quicker than the rest of himself, but maybe it sort of flows upwards in a weird way. Sometimes it seems to flow downwards. Not certain about that. But anyway, obviously everyone can see him there. So he has to sort of go off and make a decision. I need more electricity, etc. It's a bit of a risky thing to know that it needs electricity because it might have worked for a couple of times and then suddenly you might end up being fried. I mean, why should he be protected? I mean, this is always trouble with lots of superheroes. They always make an assumption that their powers will last forever. Well, it might be a limited energy source inside your body. So that would be a problem. However, obviously everyone's chasing after him, and then he finds he's got problems, and the police do actually use a few bits of common and like cover him. There's flour involved and things, that sort of thing. But I would have used paint or glue or something that sort of makes it a bit harder to get off. Maybe glue would be a bit of or paint, but then you might avoid killing him. Of course, you wouldn't be able to breathe. Maybe that wouldn't be good. However, the storyline whizzes forward. Obviously, after a bit of, I love the professor. The professor is still there, but the professor keeps saying, "I'm responsible. I'm responsible," and he's a menace to the whole nation. Well, however, he flies off to New York, and he's in America. He's obviously trying to rule the world. Again, I don't think if you were invisible, you would really be able to rule the world very easily. One, how would anyone see you to talk? They wouldn't know they're talking to you. You just all go in there and would you feed information to them? It would be a bit tricky. However, he obviously doesn't think all this things through. And of course, There's obviously lots of problems. The Americans sometimes obviously worked out a few things a bit better. And we've got the professor still going on saying, it's my responsibility. I don't know how they keep having him around. It's sort of like he seems to turn up. But however, he's a useful character. That's the most important thing. I love the way that the banner across the top changes, the steel claw. That does change quite a bit. There's quite a lot of variation in the steel claw. They didn't keep it consistent. However, you got that storyline. You've also got obviously gangsters involved. So you've got a mix. You've got obviously the army. You've got the gangsters. Obviously the various organisations think. And also, of course, the various government think, this would be quite useful, having an invisible guy, he'd be a great secret agent. And it does mention that about Patrick McGowan. Would have been a brilliant series, The Secret Claw. He could have been a science fiction series that would have beaten them all, I'm certain. However, the next story is pretty good. Excellent. Actually, the first story was pretty good as well. And this one is where you've got this guy who's basically it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the thing means that, of course, everyone assumes and confusion reigns and everyone thinks they've got to be after the wrong guy, of course, all the way through. It lasts quite a long time, this story. It's a real good story. The artwork is, I must say, the artwork, the restoration / proofs, whatever they've done, they've really done a great job, as ever. It really is sharp. I love the end, the bits at the bottom. Here, see next week's suspenseful packed episode. See blah, blah, blah. Crandall will be tracked down, blah, blah, blah. More sensational thrills in next Saturday's instalment. However, there is a few where it turns around and says next Monday. When did it come out? Maybe Valiant came out on different days. But that's a different issue. So you've got the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story. Well, obviously that finishes in the end. And then you've got a slightly less interesting story, which is sort of maybe fits in with, I don't know, Blackbeard, Treasury Island, whatever, those sort of things. I'm not certain, but it's underwater pirates involved. I thought it was a bit of a mishmash of a story. Wasn't so convincing. Totally useless villain. Their characters, he's got a whole band of bandits or whatever, troublemakers with him, and they're useless as well. It's a ridiculous story, especially on a ship. This is the trouble. On a ship, you've got an invisible guy, or a submarine, even a submarine, wherever it is. It doesn't make a difference. I mean, you're not going to go very far. Obviously, you could throw yourself off to get off the thing, but it's not like a city where but you've got a very confined space. If you've got a group of people, they're going to find you. However, also includes the annuals, and the annuals were really good. I mean, obviously they were short stories. They were only about 6 pages or 7 pages, but they were still really good stories. Though I don't think any of the poor professor and all that sort of thing seems to have vanished from the storyline. But you've got here London going out. At least London, the view of London is slightly better. Obviously, you've got Piccadilly Circus there, but it's a better view, much easier. The ones with New York, I was just looking, thinking, not really New York. Looks like London, but just called New York instead. But anyway, that's a mere quibble again. I love the stories. British ones, maybe they're just obviously using reference work and they just put a few pictures and that's New York. Yeah. Didn't really capture New York to me. However, the next story, you've got this gang. This is the Valiant Annual 1966 one. And you've got yet another gang. And this one introduces a mummy element into the story. So you've got mummy. You've got the lot, all the universal horror film characters thrown in. So I loved it. Absolutely love these stories. I mean, every time, of course, there's always problems for him. He's always suddenly finds he's coming back into view. Needs to find some electricity. Where can I find? And of course, people cut the power, or he has to go and look for something where power isn't stopped. You think he would have gone around with a little mini transformer so he could sort of wind himself a little bit of electricity? Obviously, that wouldn't have been enough because he needs a bit. But it's a real complication for him. It's not like the Invisible Man where basically he was invisible all the time. He did have a complication, a bit like the Hulk. He would come back, go back, start, and it's. And occasionally he gets knocked out or whatever. So there's a lot of variation around a theme, which is great. And I loved it. you've got the back cover recaptures it all. You've got it obviously fading away, fades into the background. And genuinely, it was great. Now, I'm looking forward to the Spider. Now, I remember reading Steel Claw. I loved the Steel Claw. Never such a fan of the Spider. Now, maybe because it was like I always thought Spider-Man. I don't know. To me, Spider-Man. Maybe. I suppose I never really sort of thought Steel Claw with like the Invisible Girl or whatever. Those sort of things. So Spider. No, I know he wasn't at all anything to do with Spider-Man. But it just always, that's why I never really, I think because I always thought he was like a villain. And I don't know anything in particular. He was an empire of crime, syndicate of crime. And that never appealed to me. I never liked characters that are the villain characters. So, but I did love the Adam Turner. Unfortunately, they don't put an example of that page. Would have been nice if they'd included that, but there isn't. So, well, I'm really pleased with this. Just absolutely loved this. Really, I've been looking forward to it quite a while, and I was quite surprised when it suddenly turned up. I thought, what? Wow. Didn't completely forgotten to check to see if it was coming, and suddenly I got Steel Claw. Excellent. Well, loved it. Totally recommended. Yet another brilliant book from Rebellion. Just superb.